Hello class, this is going to be our demo for exercise 2, gestural drawing. In this demonstration, I'm going to basically go over some of the exercise requirements and then also some of the process for our gesture drawing. As you can see, I've broken up my page into basically two halves. We have this left half and this right half. I do recommend you break your page down the middle basically on a horizontal plane. If you try to break it in the middle going long ways, you're gonna have these two really long rectangles and won't really have too much room to draw and will more than likely end up drawing kind of small. So breaking it up this way is gonna be the best approach. I do want you guys to have 4 different quadrants or 4 different boxes to draw in. So I want you guys to break your page in half on the front, and then if you flip it over, you can hit the page in half again on the back side. Box 1 is going to be our 4-minute gesture. Box 2 is going to be our 3-minute gesture. Box 3 is going to be 2 minutes, and then box 4 is going to be 1 minute. So during this time, like I said, we do kind of want to reflect on what our object looks like before we jump into our gesture drawing. We do kind of want to imagine what our object would look like on our page, right? So let's take some time to look at our object. Like I said before in the PowerPoint, we do want to kind of break down what are some of the major shapes that we can track in our object and how that's going to translate to our drawing. So we're going to translate the shapes we see, or I guess we can say the object that we're looking at. We're going to try to break that up into more simple shapes, and then also kind of look at where those shapes kind of sit in relation to each other. So I'm going to be drawing this boot here that I have on the right. By looking at this boot, and I'm looking at large kind of major shapes, if I'm looking at the tube of the boot, I can see kind of like a long rectangle. As I move over to the right hand side, where the top of the foot and the I guess the toes of the boot are, we can kind of see that as maybe 2 triangles as we move through. Maybe like a rhombus and then a triangle kind of shape. And then if we're looking at the boot heel, we can see that is kind of another kind of a rhombus type of shape. So now that we have those shapes kind of lined up and then identified, what we want to do next is kind of try to look at the orientation of our object, right? So just by kind of looking at my boot, I can already kind of pick apart some size relationships based on the axis. Right, my boot is taller than it is wide, and it is kind of in this upright position. So I'm going to say that the axis is going to be vertical. So whenever I'm looking at my object, I'll say, okay, whenever I'm drawing this, there's going to be kind of a line going down the middle. It won't be perfectly symmetrical left and right, but this line will tell me that, okay, this thing needs to be taller than it is wide, right? It's going to kind of set up my my placement on the page. It'll set up the size relationship, and it'll kind of give me some kind of a base to kind of move back and work into. The axis doesn't always need to be just kind of straight up and down. It can also be a line that moves through your form that kind of gives you a sense of the energy and the kind of movement in the form. So I could also draw an axis on my boot that kind of takes me from the toe, kind of in this almost like a backwards J shape or even like an L shape back up to the top of the boot, right? If that kind of helps you kind of work in the energy and the flow of that boot. So the major axis would be kind of like from the tube of the boot down to the heel, and then another kind of major flow line or another kind of axis point would be the sweep from like the ankle into the toe. So now that we have our boot pretty much figured out in terms of shapes, axis lines, and kind of flow lines, the next thing you want to do is try to imagine more or less where we want our boot to be on our page, right? Almost kind of like we're going to be doing like a copy and paste. And once we can kind of imagine more or less the size that we want our boot to be on our page, then we can move in to actually drawing. So this first box, like I said, is 4 minutes. So in those 4 minutes, I do want to block in my major shapes first. I do want to try to make sure that this thing is, again, following my size relationship. Is it taller than it is wide? And then once we have some of those kind of major details kind of blocked in, then we can come back in and start to pick up things like the interior contours of like where the boot divides, where the seam is, where some of the scuffs are on the boot, some of the major lines like the creases, those kinds of things are going to be secondary to these kind of major points of information. Once we finish off this this first 4-minute quadrant, then we can kind of assess, okay, what am I focusing on? What am I seemingly focusing on the left-hand side here? And how can I transition that into a 3-minute drawing? What can I be doing faster? What took me that extra minute on the first box? And how can I kind of streamline my process? And in doing so, hopefully by the time we get to box 4, we're in a process where we can really streamline our drawing and block things in quickly and accurately so that we can start to focus in on some of those details that are going to make this drawing a lot more enjoyable, a lot more realistic. But first things first, we do kind of want to try to get that that kind of feel for speed and then also accuracy. So that was about a 3-minute contour drawing there. I did kind of stop a little faster than I should have, but it's because I kind of found myself just kind of getting too much into my details. So right now at this point, I would kind of pause and say, okay, so what did I do in 4 minutes that could be improved in a 3-minute time span? So whenever I did this first one, obviously kind of in the beginning, I was able to jot everything in approximately the way I wanted it. But then by the time I got into this kind of stitch design, obviously it's very loose and kind of fast. I can notice that my attention kind of shifted to working on the stitch work instead of maybe going back in and then focusing on the creases in the boot, some more of the details in the boot that are kind of key to the structure. So maybe I should have gone back in here and really kind of defined the break between this kind of like white leather and this darker brown leather. I could have come back in and maybe corrected a little bit of this this transition from the boot tube into the toe of the heel here. Whenever I drew it, I kind of drew it a little bit more pitched up, and then it is more of like a rounded kind of edge. Also, looks like I drew it just a tiny bit too big and ended up breaking into my box 2. So then maybe in box 2, I can maybe focus a little bit more on the scale that I'm drawing this thing so that I'm not running off of the page, but I am utilizing as much of the page as possible. So these are some kind of reflections that we could focus on. So in box 2, I could say, okay, in 3 minutes, focus more on structure, focus more on the kind of visual divisions that exist on my form. and then try to get that kind of nailed in before I start to focus on details like the stitching, right? So we do want to create 4 drawings in this process: a 4-minute drawing, a 3-minute drawing, 2-minute drawing, and then a 1-minute drawing. The 1-minute drawing obviously is something that maybe doesn't get finished, and I think time is something that we really kind of want to focus on in this process. Is that as soon as that timer hits 4 minutes, or as soon as it hits 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, we do want to stop at that point and then basically reflect on what we could accomplish in that amount of time. We don't want to kind of push beyond it. You don't want to do what I did and kind of stop a little bit early. You want to utilize the maximum amount of time that you have available to you, and then try to see what you can focus on later in the process to make this a better drawing. So as a skeleton, as a kind of like a basic drawing, I think this is a pretty good start as a gesture drawing. I left myself some room for improvement. I didn't try to knock it out and get it as perfect as I could on the first try. Even though this is the box that I have the most amount of time on, there's still a lot of improvement that can be made here in terms of corrections that I can make. But I think those corrections are sort of minor, right? I can still come back in here and make those corrections rather quickly. One thing to kind of keep in mind, here I'm working with a charcoal pencil, just so that you guys can see the drawing a little bit easier. Whenever you are working in your own sketchbook from your pencil set, I would recommend using maybe the 2B pencil. It's visible, but it's not too dark, so that you can go back in and make some corrections and erase. But again, the charcoal pencil that I was using for this demonstration was strictly for the means of making this look as visible as possible. You can write your notes in terms of what you plan on doing and transitioning from one box to the next on your sketchbook. You can kind of take those notes on your phone, however you want to go about it, or even if you want to just kind of make those mental notes and then capitalize on that by putting that into action in the next box, right? We do kind of want to focus on line today. Try to avoid doing any kind of shading on these. I know it's kind of a very kind of exciting thing to do with this process, and especially when we're kind of getting into drawing, we want to jump into that right away. But let's try to just focus on lines for these drawings and focus on speed and then also accuracy.